Good evening, dear listener. As the moonlight softly shines through your window, settle into a comfortable space, letting the stillness of the night wrap around you. Tonight, we'll journey into the Enchanted Woods with Elric, a weary traveler searching for something that's been hidden deep within his heart. Let the gentle rhythm of the story guide you to a place of peace, where each step into the mist leads Elric and you closer to a quiet understanding. Breathe deeply, let go of the day, and drift into your dreams as we walk together under the watchful eyes of the fairy fox. A low, shifting mist clung to the ancient trees, swirling and whispering like the breath of an old ghost. It was said that once the mist settled on the border of the Enchanted Woods, only the foolhardy or the forlorn dared step through its veils. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of those who had entered and returned changed, eyes clouded, minds tangled in webs of haunting memories and half-forgotten dreams. Yet, on this night, under a waning moon that hung like a silver coin in the sky, a lone traveler ventured toward that forbidden edge. Elric was his name, a wanderer with a weary soul and empty pockets, both from a life spent drifting, searching for something he could no longer name. His eyes, once sharp and bright, now dulled by regret, flickered as he approached the boundary where the fog thickened like smoke, swallowing the trees into shadowed obscurity. He stood at the edge, listening. The world around him was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of unseen creatures hidden among the roots and brambles. His heart was pounding, though he could not say why. The stories of the Enchanted Woods, the whispered tales he'd gathered in villages and roadside inns, stirred at the back of his mind. Some said a spirit guarded the woods, a fox, silver as starlight, with eyes that gleamed like mirrors in the night. They called it the fairy fox, the guardian of lost travelers and keeper of secrets no mortal should know. But he was not a child to be frightened by tales. He had lived long enough to see that magic was often just another name for wonder, and that wonder was a fleeting thing. So, with a last look at the world he was leaving behind, he stepped into the mist. As he walked, the air thickened, growing colder, pressing upon him as though the fog had weight. 1,000 invisible hands urging him forward. Each footfall was muffled, swallowed by the silence of the forest. The towering trees closed around him, their branches arched like the backs of ancient beasts. Shadows gathered at the corners of his vision, shifting and swirling as if watching his every move. Then he heard it, the faintest rustle, like the murmur of leaves caught in a gentle breeze. He turned, straining to see through the fog, his eyes catching the fleeting shimmer of something silver moving in and out of the shadows. He blinked, heart racing, as a shape began to emerge from the mist. A creature, small and graceful, stepping lightly upon the forest floor. It was a fox, but unlike any he had ever seen. Its fur gleamed with an ethereal light, a silver that seemed woven from moonbeams, shifting and glimmering with each delicate step. Its eyes, large and luminous, fixed upon him with an unsettling intensity, ancient and knowing, as though it could see through his very soul. Elric stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move, caught in the gaze of this otherworldly creature. The fox regarded him in silence, tilting its head ever so slightly, as if it were contemplating some riddle of its own. Then, without a sound, it turned and began to walk deeper into the mist, its tail trailing behind like a comet's tail, leaving a faint shimmering path in its wake. Elric felt a strange pull, a tug deep within his chest, urging him to follow. He stumbled forward, his feet moving of their own accord, guided by some unseen force. The fox led him through narrow, winding trails, ducking under low-hanging branches and stepping over roots that seemed to reach out like fingers. The mist thickened around them, closing in until all he could see was the faint shimmer of the fox ahead, his only beacon in this world of shadows and secrets. As they moved, he felt the weight of the forest pressing down upon him, as though he were walking in a dream where time had no meaning, where each step took him further from the world he knew. He began to lose himself in the rhythm of the journey, the steady pace of his feet on the forest floor, the soft crunch of leaves beneath him, the whispering hush of the trees. Every so often, the fox would glance back, its eyes catching his, filled with a silent promise, a promise that, though he did not yet understand, he found himself bound to. They walked on, deeper into the heart of the forest, until Elric could no longer remember how long he had been walking or where he was. All he knew was the fox, the silent guide, whose eyes glowed like twin stars in the darkness, leading him through a labyrinth of trees and shadows, into the mysteries that lay hidden within the Enchanted Woods. And somewhere, in the depths of that mist-shrouded forest, Elric felt a whisper in his soul, a murmur of something old and powerful, something that called to the deepest, darkest parts of him. He knew in that moment that he had crossed a threshold, not just of the forest, but of his own heart. What he would find there, he could not yet say, but he knew that he was no longer alone. In the forest's deep shadows, beneath the tangled boughs where moonlight rarely reached, Elric followed the ghostly fox. His steps were light, hesitant, as if the very air around him warned of secrets too weighty for a man to bear. The fox glided ahead, its silver fur shimmering faintly in the dimness, a faint flicker of starlight in the gloom. Its movements were almost otherworldly, its paws barely seeming to touch the earth as it slipped between trees like a spirit, like an echo of something long past. Elric did not know how long they walked. The path wound and twisted, weaving through groves and glades that seemed to shift and change with each glance. Branches arched like cathedral ceilings above him, and strange shadows flickered at the edges of his sight, phantoms in the periphery, watching and waiting. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft patter of unseen creatures slipping into the dark undergrowth. Then at once, the fox stopped. Elric halted, his breath catching as the creature turned to face him fully. They stood together in a small clearing, lit faintly by the glow of the fox's silver fur and the pale sheen of the moon breaking through a crack in the clouds. The fox's eyes gleamed twin orbs of light in the shadowed world, and in their depths, Elric saw something strange, something that both drew him in and warned him to turn back. The fox held his gaze, its eyes narrowing as if in some silent conversation, as if it saw something in him that even he did not know. The moment stretched, and in that unspoken exchange, Elric felt a whisper, a question almost lingering just beyond his reach, inviting him to speak, though he did not know the words. The fox raised a slender paw, almost regal, and began to scrape gently at the forest floor. Elric watched, captivated, as the creature's claw traced symbols in the soft earth, symbols that glowed faintly for just a moment before fading back into shadow. He could not read them, but a feeling stirred within him, an inexplicable familiarity, like an old, half-remembered song that touched something deep within his heart. Then in the silence, he heard a voice, not a sound, but a whisper in his mind, soft as a sigh, yet strong as a heartbeat. "To leave this forest, traveler," the voice echoed, lilting and distant. "You must find that which is hidden in your heart. Only then will the path reveal itself." The words lingered, wrapping around him like the mist. He opened his mouth to ask, "What am I meant to find?" But the question faded in his throat. The fox only watched, its eyes patient, filled with a wisdom beyond words. It stood motionless, waiting, as if time meant nothing in the ancient world of the Enchanted Woods. Elric's mind was a tangled web of questions and doubts. What was it that his heart hid? What secret lay buried so deeply within him that it could alter his fate here in this place of mystery? His past weighed on him, memories of faces and names long lost, decisions he had made, paths he had forsaken. Could it be that the answer lay somewhere within those tangled memories, within the shadows he had tried so long to forget? The fox, sensing his turmoil, turned once more and began to walk along another path, glancing back only once to ensure he followed. And follow he did, each step feeling heavier, as if the ground itself bore witness to his thoughts, to the secrets he had kept even from himself. The fox led him down a narrow, winding trail where the trees grew closer, their twisted limbs knotted together like ancient fingers. The forest grew darker, colder, the air dense with a silence that seemed to press against him, to fill his lungs with the weight of ages. In the eerie quiet, he felt the pull of the past, an ache that gnawed at his chest, urging him to look within, to see what he had buried. The fox paused once more at the edge of a silent pool, its surface smooth and black as polished obsidian. The creature sat, its gaze steady on the water, inviting him to approach. Elric knelt at the water's edge, peering into its depths, but he saw nothing of his reflection, only a vast darkness, a void that seemed to go on forever. But then, faintly, as though rising from the depths of a memory, he saw something stir within the water. Elric looked down at it, feeling the weight of his choices, the sorrow of paths he could not walk again. But within that sorrow, he felt a new clarity, a purpose that had eluded him for so long. The forest began to shift once more, its shadows deepening, the paths closing in around him, as though to force him forward, to draw him toward the heart of his journey. The fox led him onward, through pathways that seemed to blur between reality and dream, where time lost all meaning, where each step felt like a heartbeat, a pulse that thrummed through the forest's veins. At last, they came upon another clearing, smaller, darker, where the trees grew in a perfect circle, their branches arching over like guardians of a sacred space. In the center lay a single stone, old and weathered, covered in lichen that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The fox padded forward and sat beside it, its eyes meeting Elric's, conveying a silent message. Here is where the truth waits. Elric approached the stone, feeling the weight of the journey, the echoes of the whispers still clinging to him like a shroud. He knelt before it, placing his hand on the cool surface, feeling the pulse of the forest through the stone, as though it carried the memories of countless souls who had come before him, each seeking something lost, something hidden. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift, allowing himself to feel the weight of his past. And as he did, he heard a final whisper, faint and distant, yet clear as a bell. It was his own voice, speaking from the depths of his heart, a promise he had made long ago, a vow to find peace, to seek belonging, to live with purpose. The whisper faded, leaving him in silence. He opened his eyes, and there, standing beside him, the fox nodded, its eyes filled with a quiet satisfaction, as though he had passed some unseen trial. The air around them grew lighter, and Elric felt a weight lifting from his heart, a burden he had carried without knowing. And as he rose, the fox turned once more, guiding him back onto the path, deeper into the forest's shadows, as though the journey had only just begun. The forest grew darker as Elric followed the fox, the once familiar shapes of trees and shadows twisting into forms that seemed almost sentient. The air thickened, dense, with an unseen force that pressed upon him, weighing down his every step. The fox moved ahead in silence, its silver fur casting a faint glow, a constant guide through the darkened maze. Elric felt the shadows clinging to him, brushing against his skin like cold fingers, whispering secrets he could not understand. The path narrowed, leading them to a clearing where the trees formed a perfect ring. In the center, a pool of water lay as still and black as midnight, reflecting no light, no stars. The fox paused by the pool's edge, its eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. Elric understood, without a word spoken, that he was meant to look into those dark waters, to see what lay hidden within them and within himself. He knelt by the pool, gazing into its depths. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. Then faintly, images began to form, rising from the shadows like phantoms. He saw himself as a young man, full of dreams and ambitions, standing at a crossroads. The open world spread out before him. He watched as a younger version of himself chose the path of solitude, leaving behind those he had loved, seeking something he could not name, something he thought would bring him peace. The image shifted, and he saw the faces of those he had left behind, his friends, his family, each one touched by the shadow of his absence. He saw their sorrow, their disappointment, and the weight of that choice bore down on him like a stone. His heart ached with a regret so deep it seemed to consume him, pulling him into the darkness of the pool. The fox nudged his arm gently, pulling him back from the edge. Its eyes were soft, almost compassionate, as if to remind him that this was not a punishment, but a trial, a chance to confront the truth, to unburden himself from the weight of what he had left unspoken. As he steadied himself, the water shifted once more, showing him another vision. A woman with eyes bright as the stars and a smile that had once filled his world with light. She was someone he had loved deeply, yet his restlessness had driven him away, leaving her with only memories and promises he had failed to keep. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the silent resignation as she watched him walk away. He felt a pang of sorrow and shame, the kind that burrowed deep, reminding him of what he had lost in his search for something more, something he could not even name. He reached out, his hand hovering over the water, as if he could touch the memory, as if he could turn back time. But as his fingers brushed the surface, the image dissolved, leaving him with nothing but his own reflection. A man aged by regret, his eyes haunted by the ghosts of his choices. In that moment, he understood the purpose of this journey. It was not about finding a way out of the forest, but about finding his way back to himself, to the truths he had avoided, the wounds he had left unhealed. The fairy fox was not just guiding him through the woods, but through the labyrinth of his own heart, urging him to face the shadows he had hidden from for so long. A shiver passed through him as he felt the presence of the forest close in, as though it, too, waited for him to make peace with his past. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of his regrets, his mistakes, his losses. And then, slowly, he allowed himself to let them go. He whispered a silent apology, a prayer to those he had hurt, to the man he had once been, promising to honor their memory, to carry them forward with him instead of leaving them buried in the shadows. When he opened his eyes, the pool had changed. The once black water was now clear, reflecting the silver glow of the fox and the faint glimmer of starlight above. He looked up at the fox, feeling a strange lightness, a release that filled his heart with something he had not felt in a long time. Peace. The fox nodded, its eyes gleaming with approval, and turned to lead him away from the pool. Elric rose, feeling as if a great weight had lifted from his shoulders. The forest no longer felt oppressive, and the shadows that clung to the trees seemed gentler, less menacing, as though they too acknowledged his acceptance of the truth. They walked on in silence, the fox and the man, their steps quiet on the soft earth. The trials of the heart had been faced, and though his sorrow and regrets remained, they no longer bound him. He was free to move forward, to find the path beyond the Enchanted Woods, guided by the light he had rediscovered within himself. As they left the clearing, Elric glanced back one last time at the pool, now serene, reflecting the stars that had witnessed his journey. And in that stillness, he understood that while he might leave the forest, he would never truly be free of it. It would remain a part of him, a place he could return to within his heart, a reminder of the trials he had faced, the peace he had won. The fox continued its silent march, and Elric followed, knowing that the journey was nearing its end, yet feeling as though a new beginning awaited just beyond the next bend in the path. The forest's final stretch lay before Elric, illuminated by a soft, ethereal light that seemed to come from the air itself. The shadows had gentled, and the trees no longer loomed like watchful giants, but stood like silent guardians, bidding him farewell. The fairy fox trotted ahead, its silver fur glowing with a quiet brilliance, a beacon that guided him through the thinning mist toward a distant break in the woods where dawn's first light peeked over the horizon. The journey had changed him, Elric knew. The trials he had faced within the forest had left their mark. But where once he had carried only sorrow and regret, there was now a quiet understanding, a stillness he had not known before. His heart felt lighter, as though the weight he had carried for so long had been lifted, replaced by a warmth that spread through him like a gentle fire. The fox paused at the edge of the forest, where the trees opened into a meadow bathed in morning light. It turned to face him, and Elric saw, for the first time, a softness in its gaze. a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. The fox's eyes held that same ancient wisdom, but within them lay a hint of something else, a farewell, tender and final, as though it knew this was the end of their time together. Elric knelt, looking into the fox's luminous eyes, feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving this strange creature, this guide who had led him through the shadows of his own heart. "Thank you," he murmured, the words falling from his lips with a depth he could not fully express, for it was not merely gratitude, it was reverence, an awe for the forest, for the fox, for the magic that had shown him the truth he had long sought. The fox regarded him quietly, then took a step closer, pressing its head gently against his hand. Elric felt a warmth bloom from the touch, a strange energy flowing from the creature into him, a feeling that filled him with a light that was both gentle and fierce, soft yet unbreakable. It was as though the fox was leaving him with something of itself, a parting gift that would remain with him long after he left the forest. As the fox stepped back, Elric felt the warmth settle within his chest, a quiet flame that burned steadily, filling him with a sense of calm and purpose. He understood, in some wordless way, that the gift was not only a farewell but a promise. A promise that the wisdom of the forest, the guidance of the fox, would remain within him. A light to guide him through whatever shadows he might face beyond the woods. The fox tilted its head, a final nod, and then turned, slipping silently back into the mist. Elric watched as it vanished, the silver glow fading into the trees, until he was alone, standing at the edge of the Enchanted Woods. He felt a strange stillness settle over him, a peace that filled the quiet spaces of his heart, wrapping around him like a soft mantle. With one last look into the depths of the forest, he turned and stepped into the meadow, where the world beyond awaited. The morning light spread across the field, warming his face, illuminating the path ahead. He could hear the distant murmur of a river, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the faint sounds of the waking world. Yet as he walked, he felt the presence of the forest within him, a silent reminder of the journey he had taken, the truths he had faced. The trials of the Enchanted Woods were now a part of him, woven into the very fabric of his soul, a quiet strength that would carry him forward, whatever path he might choose. And within his heart, he carried the gift of the fairy fox, a light that would never fade, a guide that would never abandon him. It was a gift that could not be seen or touched, but felt, a warmth that glowed softly within him, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there was always a way through, always a path to be found, if only one looked deeply enough. Elric knew that the forest had given him something precious, something he could not repay. He walked on, his steps light, his heart steady, leaving the shadows of the Enchanted Woods behind. But he knew that the magic of the forest and the spirit of the fairy fox would remain with him, a quiet presence in the depths of his soul.